More than 530 million people worldwide are living with diabetes, and tens of millions more are unknowingly standing at the edge of that diagnosis with impaired fasting glucose or prediabetes. The global medical response has been an ever-expanding arsenal of pharmaceutical interventions, but a growing body of clinical evidence is now delivering findings that challenge the assumption that lifelong medication is the only answer. In a 3-month clinical study of 36 adults with type 2 diabetes, nearly 90% of participants showed meaningful improvement in blood glucose levels through intermittent fasting alone. Of those who achieved remission and discontinued their medications, 55% maintained that drug-free remission 1 year later. To understand how fasting hours can accomplish what drugs often cannot, we need to revisit the root cause of type 2 diabetes. It is not simply high blood sugar, it is insulin resistance. Decades of chronically high carbohydrate intake, frequent eating, and late-night meals cause the insulin receptors on muscle and fat cells to progressively lose their sensitivity. The pancreas compensates by producing ever larger amounts of insulin, and the resulting hyperinsulinemia eventually exhausts the insulin-producing beta cells. What makes this process remarkable is that insulin resistance, especially in its early and intermediate stages, is reversible. And the most powerful mechanism for reversing it is the deliberate, strategic use of fasting periods. When food intake ceases, the body follows a precise metabolic timeline. In the first 4 to 6 hours after the last meal, blood glucose returns to baseline and insulin secretion falls to minimal levels, allowing insulin receptors to begin recovering their sensitivity. Between 8 and 10 hours, liver glycogen is depleted and the body initiates fat oxidation and ketone production, the metabolic switch that directly attenuates insulin resistance. Between 12 and 16 hours, autophagy activates and begins clearing ectopic fat deposits, the abnormal accumulation of fat within liver cells, muscle fibers, and crucially, within the pancreas itself. This ectopic fat is now understood to be the primary driver of both peripheral insulin resistance and beta cell dysfunction. Removing it restores function at the cellular level in ways that no glucose-lowering drug can replicate. The clinical data confirm this mechanism with striking precision. A 2024 meta-analysis of studies on 168 time-restricted eating showed that participants experienced significant reductions in fasting blood glucose, fasting insulin levels, and the insulin resistance index HOMA-IR. A separate comprehensive meta-analysis confirmed that intermittent fasting reduced fasting blood glucose by a mean of 3.34 mg/dl and produced meaningful HbA1c reductions. The most paradigm-shifting finding came from a head-to-head trial in which 405 adults with early type 2 diabetes were randomized to a 52 intermittent fasting meal replacement diet, metformin or empagliflozin for 16 weeks. The intermittent fasting group achieved better glycemic control and greater weight loss than both pharmaceutical arms. A dietary strategy focused on when food is eaten outperformed 2 of the most prescribed diabetes medications in the world. The gut microbiome provides an additional and underappreciated mechanism. Intermittent fasting selectively enriches beneficial gut bacteria that produce short-chain fatty acids. These short-chain fatty acids reinforce the intestinal epithelial tight junctions that prevent bacterial toxins from entering the bloodstream directly, enhance insulin sensitivity in skeletal muscle and adipose tissue, and suppress hepatic glucose production. The fasting period restructures the gut microbial ecosystem, and that restructured ecosystem feeds back into improved insulin sensitivity, a self-reinforcing cycle that extends well beyond the fasting window itself. Research also indicates that periodic fasting or fasting mimicking dietary patterns can stimulate the regeneration of pancreatic beta cells that have been suppressed by lipotoxicity and glucotoxicity, restoring insulin secretory capacity in individuals with early-stage type 2 diabetes. 3 practical strategies translate this science into daily life. The first is meal sequencing. Without changing a single ingredient, changing the order in which food is eaten produces dramatic differences in postprandial blood glucose. Clinical research found that eating vegetables first, then protein, then carbohydrates last reduced the 1-hour postprandial glucose peak by up to 37%, and the 2-hour reading by 17%, compared to eating carbohydrates first. In practice, this means beginning every meal with a salad, soup, or steamed vegetables, before touching any grain, bread, or rice. This single habit costs nothing and requires no dietary restriction. The second strategy is a pre-fast or pre-meal blood glucose support drink. Diluting 1 to 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar or rice vinegar in 200 milliliters of water, and consuming it immediately before or after the final meal of the day, consistently reduces postprandial glucose and insulin area under the curve. In clinical trials, the acetic acid in vinegar inhibits alpha amylase and alpha glucosidase activity in the small intestine, slowing the conversion of starch to glucose and slows gastric emptying, smoothing the glucose absorption curve. Always dilute vinegar thoroughly before consumption to protect tooth enamel and rinse with water afterward. The third strategy is a fasting period herbal tea routine to stabilize blood glucose and support insulin sensitivity throughout the overnight fast. Simmer 1 piece or half a teaspoon of cinnamon with 3 pieces of dried ginger in 300 milliliters of water for 10 minutes. Cinnamon's cinnamaldehyde enhances insulin receptor signal transduction and promotes the translocation of the glucose transporter GLUT4 to cell membranes, increasing cellular glucose uptake. A meta-analysis of multiple clinical trials found cinnamon supplementation reduced fasting blood glucose by a mean of 8.2 mg/dl. Dried ginger's Shogol compounds promote glucose uptake in skeletal muscle and suppress hepatic gluconeogenesis. Together, these two compounds provide dual-pathway blood glucose stabilization. Throughout the fasting window, the 7-day protocol begins as follows. On days 1 and 2, measure fasting blood glucose each morning if possible. Record all meal times and add 1 cup of cinnamon ginger tea before breakfast without changing anything else. On days 3 and 4, implement strict meal sequencing at every meal and establish a firm 8 p.m. eating cutoff with resumption no earlier than 8 a.m. the following morning, creating a 12-hour fast. Add diluted vinegar immediately after the final evening meal. On days 5 and 6, extend the fast to 14 hours. By finishing dinner by 6:30 to 7 p.m., begin meals with whole grain options such as oat and brown rice, porridge or mixed grain rice, and add a protein-centered breakfast, including eggs and leafy greens. From day 7 onward, maintain all 3 strategies: reversed meal sequencing, 12 to 16 hours of fasting, and the cinnamon ginger tea and vinegar routine at least 5 days per week. Retest fasting blood glucose at weeks 2 and 4. Critical safety warnings are essential. Anyone currently taking insulin injections or glucose-lowering medications faces a genuine risk of hypoglycemia when extending fasting periods and must consult their physician and increase blood glucose monitoring frequency. Before making any changes, never discontinue diabetes medication independently or abruptly. Any medication reduction must be guided by a qualified healthcare provider. In response to documented blood glucose improvements, people with type 1 diabetes, pregnant women, those with significant kidney disease, and individuals who are severely underweight should not follow this protocol. Symptoms of hypoglycemia: trembling, sweating, dizziness, sudden hunger, or confusion. Require immediate consumption of a small amount of fast-acting glucose and blood glucose verification. Aim for gradual weight loss of no more than 1 to 2 kilograms per month. Aggressive restriction accelerates muscle loss and can paradoxically worsen insulin sensitivity over time. The evidence increasingly shows that the question is not simply what you eat, but when you create space between meals for the body to complete the metabolic work that only the fasted state can accomplish. Insulin resistance took years to develop. Its reversal is not instantaneous, but the clinical data leave little doubt that consistent, appropriately structured fasting periods combined with meal sequencing and blood glucose stabilizing dietary habits represent one of the most evidence-supported, non-pharmaceutical paths Available for improving glycemic control. Begin with the vegetables on your plate, and eating earlier in the evening, and let the hours of silence do their work.